The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the 12, "A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It's enough for the disciple to be like the teacher and the slave like the master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of the master's household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, and even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a son against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and in-laws against one another, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves a child of theirs more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Dearly beloved, grace and peace from the one who loves us, Jesus the Christ. And by the way, especially after hearing this text, happy Father's Day. Our first lesson and gospel today are all about speaking up and doing good, and really the consequences. Jeremiah speaks up, and even his friends, it turns out, are against him. Jesus warns of the consequences of doing good. His followers may be treated as he's been treated, accused of actually being evil. And I'll get back to this theme, but first a story. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. Our psalm for the day has great significance for me because I heard it as we sat around a table after surviving a terrible experience over 40 years ago. I lived in Madagascar for a year with my ex-husband, Bob, who was an ELCA pastor, and with his sister and brother-in-law, who were missionaries. I was very pregnant with Dan, and the roads sometimes were just dirt tracks, were terrible, even in sunny, nice weather, and they made traveling difficult, if not hazardous, all the time. They had gigantic holes, and they had some roads that were so rough, I got out of the car and walked up the hill rather than ride in it. In the desert where we lived for a year, we would come over a hill and there would be suddenly these narrow concrete affairs, perhaps 5 or 6 feet wide, maybe 100 feet long, no guardrails, and they were breaking into pieces for lack of care. I asked my brother-in-law about them, and he explained they crossed wadis, dry riverbeds, and that I should be sure that we would need those wadis, concrete bridges, in the rainy season. Well, one night we were caravanning during the rainy season in 3 vehicles with 3 missionary couples, my in-laws, a doctor and his wife, who was a nurse, and a couple who was very near retirement. They'd been there many years. It was very unusual to caravan, but it had been raining heavily, and the roads were very poor, and 2 of the couples had been delayed, one by hours and the other by days, because some of the holes in the road had filled with water, and the mud puddles were deeper than our vehicles. Some mud holes were so large, we had to drive on alternate routes through different towns in order to avoid them. So our route took us a long way over a much less familiar road, and we ended up traveling together. When we finally found the main road again, it was late. We were driving slowly. To the north, we could see yet another towering thunderstorm developing. The lightning was flashing. The clouds were rolling, and we could tell north of us it was raining hard. We were in the lead car with our in-laws and came to a place in the road where we could see yet another very large mud puddle. But by now it was pitch black and we couldn't see the other end of it. So we pulled over and stopped, and we were very close to the next town and a nice warm dry bed, so we were anxious and frustrated. And the second car with the missionary doctor also stopped. But the third car, there was this older couple, the Torviks, who had been in Madagascar for nearly their entire ministry, and they were much more familiar with the roads, and so became impatient and just went past us by. They drove straight into the puddle, off into the distance, into the darkness, and we could see their taillights disappear around a corner. They knew we had come to one of those wadis and that had filled up because of all of the rain, and that there was a bridge, and they knew where the bridge was. But the water was deep. We were afraid to follow them for fear of getting stuck. I was pregnant. We had a 1-year-old with us as well. So we got out of our vehicles, reconnoitered with one another, and the 6 of us stared into the water ahead, trying to determine how deep it was, laughing a little that the older couple was least chicken and would soon be in a nice bed. But we decided to sleep in our vehicles and just try and get through in the morning when the water almost certainly would have receded. So everyone was climbing back into their cars, but something about it was bothering me. That big Land Rover the Torviks was driving seemed to do all right, but I hadn't seen their lights over on the other side of the river. And an inner voice prompted me to just wade in and see if I could see if they made it. And I thought I could hear crying. Everyone except Bob thought the pregnant lady was crazy, but he was also the one who knew that I was actually stubborn enough to go by myself. So we held hands and we waded in, and the water was soon knee-deep. The farther we went, the more alarmed we became. The water was now waist-deep, and the current was so strong we could barely stand, even hanging on to each other. And we were nowhere yet near the bank of the river, which we could see by a line of trees. And then I was certain I heard cries, and soon Bob was hurrying rather than just humoring me. The cries were human cries. Our friends were in trouble. Bob sent me back, and one of the other men joined him, and between us, we found one flashlight in our vehicles. These were missionaries, not Boy Scouts. And when they shone it into the river, they could see that the car had washed off that little bridge. And Mrs. Torvik had escaped from a window and was clinging for her life to the outside of the car and had been crying for half an hour, "Save me, Jesus, save us." And so Bob, my ex, who spent a great deal of his early life swimming in the surf in Florida and was a very strong swimmer, swam out to the vehicle and rescued Mrs. Torvik, brought her to shore, and then went back with the flashlight, stood on the top of the car, and with that flashlight spotted Pastor Torvik, who had been washed unconscious downstream. His head was caught above the water in a bush. And the doctor, missionary, and my brother-in-law hurried downstream along the bank and resuscitated him while the women warmed Mrs. Torvik in the cars. And then, just as they returned to the vehicles with Pastor Torvik, the wet flashlight quit. As we tried to get warm, we found ourselves marveling over the rescue. A pregnant woman wading into a river, Bob, who was actually the only one of us that was a good swimmer, a physician and his wife, a nurse who could perform first aid, one flashlight that lasted just long enough, the circumstances we all happened to be traveling together. So it was the next day when we finally reached a little grassy outpost of the ELCA mission in Africa, weary and bedraggled. The Torviks had had with them their most important papers and clothes they needed to travel back to the States. Many of their most precious possessions, unfortunately, were ruined, but we prepared a great dinner and we gave thanks. And Mrs. Torvik, whose voice was still hoarse from crying out at the top of her lungs, "Save us, Jesus, save us," read this song, Psalm 69. "Save me, O God, for the waters have risen up to my neck. I have come into deep waters, and the torrent washes over me. I have grown weary with my crying. My eyes have failed from looking for my God." Now I know that you have probably not driven off a decrepit cement bridge into the dark and murky waters of a flooded river in Africa. But you may, at one time or another, have been up to your neck in the floodwaters of life. You may have lost, at some point, many of your treasured possessions. You may have lost a loved one and felt overwhelmed. You may have been resuscitated from unconsciousness. You may have cried in fear or pain as the psalmist did until you were weary with your crying. You have likely searched at one time or another for God. If you haven't, I would be a little surprised, because that is what it is to be children of Adam, children of the earth, vulnerable to the storms of life. To be human is to have many joys and adventures, but also to suffer many things. We are subject to death because we are human, but as Paul says, the free gift is not like the trespass. Because as much as death reigns, much more so the free gift of God reigns in our lives. So as much as you have felt in danger, as much as you have suffered, how much more God spares you? How much more God is there for you in the suffering? How much more God's free gift of grace is capable of giving you life? And when our community suffered a deliberate, camouflaged, masked, armed flood at the hand of our government, how much more love and kindness and life, the gifts of God, rose out of our sadness and fear. Minneapolis and St. Paul responded not with riots, but by showing up and caring, godly responses, whether the people were religious or not. Some watchers were sort of amazed, but some maligned us for that response. No surprise. That's how the prophets and Jesus were treated, for telling the truth and doing good. God can use even evil to raise up loving kindness. God, after all, knows about even the smallest creatures, even a sparrow. God knows all about you, is acquainted with your ways, infuses your life with God's own life, and in the midst of our floods in life, gives us courage and grace enough, not just to endure, but to give life. So some might hear the story of the Torviks and wonder why these people who so faithfully served the church suffered such losses. Some may wonder why they were not filled with despair or cynicism or regret, many mementos of 40 years lost. But our texts today answer the question. Because of our faith, not in spite of it, we may, as Jesus did, experience more than our share of hardships. We experienced an amazing rescue, but more amazing to me was the Torviks' response. Rather than blaming their misfortune on an unjust, uncaring God, they saw and heard the hand of God. 2 vehicles following them, a determined young woman, a good swimmer, a doctor and a nurse, extra hands to save and put blankets around, without any of which they would not have survived. And so in their experience, not despair or threat, but the care of God. And that's what we prayed in the prayer of the day. We prayed to serve without counting the cost, to simply do God's will. We asked God that we remain faithful despite our wounds, to endure and not become cynical. We live in a world that is often difficult, even cruel, a world that can seem to be ruled by those mainly seeking suffering and death. But we know that Christ has come to provide strength for every situation so that we can be faithful to our callings, especially in these days, to be good and kind and loving to our neighbors no matter what. So do not be afraid. God watches over the sparrow, one of the smallest creatures of creation, and surely, surely God watches over you. Amen.